Hi, everyone, and welcome to our Summer Associate Series webinar, Finishing Strong, How to Continue to Stand Out as a Summer Associate in a Good Way. I'm Ryan Frompadulli, Program Manager of the Institute for Energy Law, which is an institute of the Center for American and International Law. This program is hosted by the Program Subcommittee of IEL's Young Energy Professionals Practice Committee, and this is the second webinar in a three-part series of webinars designed for summer associates. The third program in the series is going to be on June 27th. Our moderator today is Meg Griffith. Meg is an associate at Susman Godfrey in the Houston office. She summered at two different law firms and has served as a mentor for summer associates at both Susman and her previous firm. I'll now turn it over to Meg to introduce Leah and David.
Thanks, Ryan. Thank you all for joining us this morning. I'm excited to be moderating today's panel, especially as I know some of the questions that we're planning to cover today I've heard from some of our own summer associates in the past few weeks. Our panelists are David Peterson and Leah Hungerman. David is a partner at Susman Godfrey, where he's a litigator and has served previously as one of the hiring partners at our firm. David's based in our Houston office. Leah is an associate at Reed Smith. She's also a litigator with an emphasis on antitrust and competition matters, and Leah is based in Pittsburgh. So to kick things off, let's start with your backgrounds before you got to the firms you're at today. So I'll start with David. Where did you go to law school, and how did you spend your 1L and 2L summers?
Thanks, Meg. So I was at law school at University of Texas at Austin. I'm trying to remember back to my 1L summer. I did a few weeks with what was then called Fulbright and Jaworski and is now Norton Rose Fulbright or something along those lines. As y'all will figure out over your careers, like you have these very specific ideas about law firms when you're in law school, and then they merge and change names and all these things. You remember them like back at the same time you were in law school. They'll always be stuck that way in your head. So I spent some time at Fulbright in, I think, energy litigation and bankruptcy, if I remember correctly. And then I was also a summer associate at a smaller firm called Diamond McCarthy, and spent a little bit of time in their Houston, Dallas, and Austin offices for a few weeks. So Meg, you just wanted 1L summer, is that right?
2L too, but
Oh.
I'm curious, were you in all three cities during that one summer?
Yeah, it was a really interesting deal. There was a small firm that had multiple offices in the state, and they wanted people to meet everybody. So I think it was like a week or two in each office or something. It was kind of interesting. Um, Kind of a unique way to do it. So then 2L summer, I went back to Fulbright for, I think it may have been like 2 weeks or something like that. Just because I'd already been there before, but was still interested. And I think I went through energy litigation again. And then I was at Beck Redden, which is another Houston litigation boutique, and I knew I was very focused on litigation at that point. I think I spent 4 weeks there, and then I spent 4 weeks at Susman Godfrey, which is obviously where I ultimately ended up. Um, and then I think I had to get back for like editorial board duties or something on Law Review. So it was a very quick moving summer between a bunch of different firms.
Yeah, sure sounds like it. Leah, same question to you. Where did you go to law school, and how did you spend your summers during law school?
Yeah, so I went to the University of Pittsburgh for law school. My 1L summer, I worked at a small regional litigation firm, doing some insurance defense work, and I worked there through my 2L year until the summer where I summered at Reed Smith. It was the summer of 2020, so it was certainly a different kind of summer program. It was fully remote at that time, just due to COVID, and abbreviated. So it was 5 weeks, but I had a really great experience even with the remote program. And I think that programming led me into the antitrust section of Reed Smith. I worked with a few of the attorneys over the summer and really enjoyed the subject matter of the work and the people. I had not taken an antitrust class in law school at all, but I, remembered the Sherman Act from grade school and history classes. So that was kind of my background. So it was a learn as you go experience, but I summered there my 2L and returned after graduation.
Okay, great. And then, so I'll stick with you, Leah. In your position as an associate at Reed Smith, what's your involvement in the summer associate program been like?
It's been great. I'm actually on our summer committee, so I do a lot with the summer associates, and that goes from, helping plan events to sort of that mentoring role. I served as a summer associate mentor last year, which was a really great experience. It helps you get to know some of the more junior attorneys and vice versa. So I really loved that. I also work closely with the summers, just on assignments and, going out for coffees and the kind of more fun stuff too. But the summer associate committee is really kind of my bread and butter. That's my favorite part about being at a big firm, is getting to know all of the summer associates and work with them, and get to see how they kind of find their path at Reed Smith.
Oh, that's great. And then, David, obviously you've had a bit more experience on the hiring side. What has your experience been like with the summer programs, and then how do you see the summer program as working for hiring?
Sure. And I was worried about your like, what's your involvement with the summer program? Because it moves up and down over time. And so like yeah, I mean, when I was an associate, I was on our hiring committee. And then when I became a partner, I was running our hiring for like 3 or 4 years for the firm. And so then I kind of took a step back from that for a little bit because it was a lot of time. And so it's we run a different summer program, and I was actually thinking about this a second ago when I was talking about like summering at all these different firms over the summer, and how okay, so that was like 20 years ago at this point. As crazy as it is to say that, it was normal at that time. There used to be like a lot more split summers, and you would go for 8 weeks to one place and 6 weeks to another place or something like that, and it was really common. And so as I remember it now, like there's always this cyclical push to these things, and it started out that I think some firms realized you were more likely to go to your first firm that you went to than the second firm when they looked at the data. So a bunch of firms switched to first half only, which then just led to everybody like largely not splitting at all. And I think we are one of the few outliers to that, since we run a 4-week summer program and we tell our summer associates you can show up at any time from May through August. And so we'll end up having people show up really, really late in the game as they've finished other summer associate programs. Having been through the summer associate program, both at this firm and other firms, and kind of looking at it from the firm side, like it's a huge benefit to us from a hiring side, and it's a huge benefit, I hope, to the law students and future associates, just because you're able to get a feel for a place, in ways that you're not going to find on the internet, on message boards and things like that, which is like 90% of the information that's out there. But even just through interviews and things, it's really hard to get a feel for what the culture of a firm is like, what the people are actually like, and what the day-to-day looks like. And so from the law student side, I think that's pretty eye-opening. And you're never going to figure out exactly what it feels like to be an associate there, by showing up for a few weeks. But you can figure out what are the people like, how do they treat each other, how do associates interact with partners, how do people interact with the staff. Are these people that I want to be around? Are they people who seem engaged by what they're doing and happy? Or do they have one foot out the door? So that piece is really helpful from the associate perspective. And then frankly, from the firm perspective, it's really helpful. We're usually at a place where like credential wise, these people are obviously a good fit. There's no concern there. But you can, give them the opportunity to see whether this is something they really like ahead of time. Our ultimate goal is when somebody shows up on day one to start as an associate, like there's no surprises. You know, their reaction should be like, this is what I expected all along. So, part of that is the summer associate experience. Not only gives you a chance to do some of the work, meet people, but also ask as many questions as you can think of. And we try and be as transparent as possible in the interview process. But in the interview process, you're more focused on like presenting yourself well and getting a job. But over a series of weeks, you have a lot more time to talk to people and really get an understanding of kind of what the firm values and how it works financially and otherwise, and make sure that that's the place you want to be.
Yeah, that was really helpful to get the insight there. And you mentioned getting an idea of what the job is like for associates. I know that one of the questions that I've gotten from OCI interviewees is, am I going to get substantive work during my summer associate position? Will I get a chance to have a writing sample for a clerkship application? But then once they get on the job and all of the summer associate tasks start coming in, they might get overwhelmed and see that they've got a lot on their plate to juggle with social events, getting to meet people, things like that. The focus of this webinar is especially on approaching the second half of the summer. So the idea here is you've already gotten the position, you're in the door. How do you want to keep making a good impression? So Leah, I'll start with you. Do you have any tips for summer associates if they're getting a whole lot of assignments and they're worried about being able to finish them, how they should approach that?
Yeah, I think the best advice I can give is over communicating. So if you're feeling overwhelmed with your workload or feeling like, oh, we're running out of time, all of a sudden the summer goes by so fast and there's 3 weeks left. It's important to talk to your supervising attorneys on the matters you already are working for them on. I think it's helpful to remind them, like, I'll be here until X end date so that they have the expectation that you only have so many weeks left. And I think kind of feeling out with them, it's okay to ask, how much time do you think I need to devote to these assignments, etc., so that you can plan internally whether or not you have the capacity to take more work on. I also think if you're getting to a point where you're getting nervous that an assignment you might not be able to complete it by the end of the summer, it's really important to tell the attorney that you're working on the assignment for so that they can add in supplemental help, find other associates, loop in another summer if need be. People understand that you're, spreading yourself a little thin over the summer. You're going to dinners and meeting all the partners and doing all of the things that you should be doing socially and networking wise. Obviously, the substantive work is the most important part, but I think people understand that this is a time where you're doing a lot. So just communicating your time constraints and things like that. I think it's important to keep taking on the substantive work. And, if your time constraint is that, you want to get out of work early for a day because it's nice out in the summer, I think that's something that you have to think through and think, the summer still feels a little bit like an interview for you. So you do want to put your best foot forward and make sure that your substantive work assignments are really your priority. But I really think communicating is the best advice I can give you. I know, especially in my shoes when I was summering, we had a 5-week summer, so it felt very fast. And it got to the last week and I thought, oh my gosh, I still have like 10 assignments that I have to finish. And I think a lot of that is buckling down and focusing on the work, but that's also, reaching out to the associate who assigned you the work to say, okay, Friday is my last day. What do I need to do before then? Is there anyone that I can loop in the event that our summer ends before this project gets finished? But I think right now where you are in the summer, it's a really good time to take stock of your longer term projects. So, those kind of 50-state survey projects that are so typical or things like that take a lot of time and might not have a firm end date. I think those are the assignments that can kind of get you into trouble because you'll wait a little longer to start them and then maybe run out of time if you don't, think about it throughout the summer. So take stock now and think, make a list of all the things that you still have due, the amount of time that you anticipate it taking, and kind of take stock of whether or not you can be taking on more work. What I will say is if there's a practice area that you haven't tried yet, that you're really interested in, even if you have to work a little bit extra, in the evening or, on a Saturday morning. That's obviously something that is a little more rare over the summer, but it's important to get to know the people in that area of practice that you want to get into. So, think about if there's assignments that you still would like to take on, and if you have that capacity. I think that's really important, and it's an important part of your summer to get to know those practice areas. But yeah, just communicating your time constraints, making sure that you are planning ahead, and staying organized is just really the most important part.
Yeah. And David, kind of on the same theme for you, is there a way that you like for summers to kind of flag for you, or wording that's helpful for communicating if they think that they're not going to be able to get an assignment done or it's taking longer than they expected?
Yeah, I mean, it's really what Leah mentioned, nailed it on the head. Over communication is, and it'll seem like over communication at the time, and it's really one of the most important things that you can learn as an associate. And so starting to practice that as a summer associate would be great. But we stress an extremely collaborative work environment. The last thing we expect an associate to do if they have an assignment is to like get the assignment, say, okay, and then go off in a cave for 2 weeks and then come back and say, here's the work product. Like that's not the idea at all. The idea is, understand what's going on, talk through it, and then as the project is going on, have some calls, come into the office, talk about what you're seeing. Is this what we're looking for? Am I missing something here? Here's this, tangential issue that we weren't thinking about. Is that worth going into or not? Um, it is much harder as a summer associate, though, because, like, for example, all of our associates are assigned to trial teams. And so you're on that case start to finish. And, that's you're not going to jump in for like a one-off piece of research or something like that. So you're going to know, yes, I am doing this task right here, but I also know the entire history of the case. I know all of the facts. I know the legal rulings. I know our strategy behind it. So you know how this tiny piece of the puzzle fits into the big picture. You cannot have that as a summer associate. I mean, anytime I give a summer associate an assignment, I'll sit down and ramble on for like an hour about the case, about all kinds of, minutia and details and different things, thinking that I'm giving helpful background. But like it's just too much to know at that point. And so a lot of the times, summer associates will get an assignment, and what's really frustrating is if they go off and don't keep you informed about what's going on, a lot of times they will get distracted by an issue that, with a simple phone call or something, to be like, oh, that doesn't apply in our case because of this other thing I haven't told you about. So a lot of it's communication constantly. Plus, we want to know what's going on. I mean, we're giving these assignments because we don't have the answer to it, and we need an answer. So, um, kind of a few things along that. One is understanding what the deadlines really are, because as Leah said, sometimes you get the, "Hey, wouldn't it be great to do a 50-state survey?" And we need that, whenever. That would be fun. Sometimes it's like, I need you to draft a, section of a motion on this, research this, draft a section of a motion. I need it by Friday. And it turns out like I need it by Friday because I am putting it into a motion. I'm going to edit it and it's getting filed on Monday or something like that. So there's a very different timelines. And the same will be true when you're an associate, understanding and asking like, what is a hard deadline that cannot be pushed? What is a deadline that has some flexibility just in case things end up taking longer? And so even understanding that as a summer can be extremely helpful because you will potentially have real tasks which have real consequences and people are waiting on real deadlines. So that's a long way around of saying like, how do you communicate if it's going to take longer than expected? I think a lot of the times, like, how long should this take? We have like a really cute answer, like it's going to take as long as it takes. We don't know because we don't know like what the answer is to this question and what it's going to involve. That's why you have the assignment. And so really it's when that kind of end of summer associate time period is pushing up against you. That one I would give some warnings. If you think you've got stuff that you're not going to get done because it is taking too long, that you could start having those conversations a week or two out and they should become like, one, what's a good stopping point here? Two, what do you want the written work product to look like? Is it more helpful if I just give you bullet points of cases and that kind of information, or do you want me spending my time writing a formal memo about this piece of the project, that kind of thing? Who can I hand, my research off to? And at that point, especially if it's something important, it would be helpful to track like what you've done and what you haven't done. I've searched these things, I've been looking at this stuff. Here are additional things that with additional time I would have wanted to look at. So just trying to think about it from the kind of the most proactive and helpful way possible. So that's
Yeah. And you mentioned avoiding going down like a rabbit hole or an issue that's not really relevant. If you've got a research project that you're giving a summer, is there kind of a guideline, like 5 to 10 hours or something else, when you think that it might help for them to check in and make sure they're on the right path?
Yeah, I think 5 or 10 hours is great. That usually, and look, the same really holds true for associates too. I always want to check in and make sure they're on the right path, but also like there's that curious piece of things, which is like, how is it going? Especially if it's a legal question, like what is the law saying here? And is it good for us? Is it bad for us? What can we do? That kind of thing. Before I just see like some written draft. And so yeah, I think 5 or 10 hours is enough time, hopefully, to kind of get your head around what the question is, get some general answers, and really start digging in from there. And to that point, one of the questions I would always think would be helpful from a summer associate's perspective would be, when you get an assignment, essentially say, like, put yourself in my shoes. How would you start this? What would your approach be? What are the resources you would consult? Because one, you'd like to actually know how some of the lawyers think and approach things. And I think it would probably be interesting. People probably have different approaches to things. But two, there's going to be resources out there that you don't know about. Like if you don't go to a law school in Texas and you come clerk at a Texas firm, you're not going to know that we have like O'Connor's Texas Rules, which is just a, Bible of information about all the rules for civil cases and spells out all the elements of causes of action and stuff like that. And there's no need to reinvent the wheel. That's usually starting point number one for like a Texas state court case. And so there may be secondary sources that are helpful. There may be other ways that people think about it. But that usually is going to give you a good way to kickstart things as well.
And Leah, what are your thoughts on about when a summer associate should check in if they've got like a research project?
I would echo what David said. I think often if it's a shorter term project, those don't spend 2 or 3 hours on this without checking in. The attorney will let you know if it's something like that. I would say give it about 5 hours of research, and check in and say, here's what I found so far. Am I missing anything? Am I going down a rabbit hole that I don't need to go down? Check in around then, and the assigning attorney might say, no, you're doing great, keep going, or they might, redirect you or help you think about it in a different way. But I know speaking from experience, I am someone who can really get lost in rabbit holes because I find the type of law that I work on very interesting. So sometimes you kind of get lost in the like, oh, this is so cool, like let me read more about it, and lose track of time. Which is really helpful for your learning, but sometimes, there's client related constraints and things like that. So I think around, 5 or so hours, just check in and say, here's how it's going so far. Like anything that I need to change, should I keep going down this path, etc.
And then changing topics, and I'll stick with you, Leah. You mentioned reaching out if you're interested in a different practice area or meeting specific attorneys. How would you go about doing that at your firm, for example, as a summer associate?
Yeah, so I think a great thing about our summer program, and I'm sure all of the summer programs that you guys are interested in, is that you get to meet attorneys from all different practice areas at a larger firm like that. So something that I did when I summered was, make a list when I started of the practice areas that I was interested in and the people that worked in those areas. Then you can reach out. I would usually do an email and say, hey, do you have, 20 minutes for a phone call? Or, would you like to get a coffee with me sometimes if they're in your office? If they're in a different location, you can ask if they can hop on Zoom and just talk about what they do every day. And I found that led to assignments in that practice area. And if it didn't, it led to I'm thinking of something I can give you, let me see if I can break a piece of my work off. Or, here's an associate in this area. They might have work for you. Making those connections, I think, is, the really key part of a summer program, because it helps you get a feel for the people in that practice group, and if your work style meshes with theirs, if you like their kind of day-to-day substantive work. And I think that's really important in finding where you fit both from a substantive interest perspective and from a people perspective, which I think are kind of go hand in hand. But yeah, I think it might sound kind of intimidating to reach out to, a partner in a firm or in a practice group that you've never worked with. But I think I found that people are very receptive about that. And I think a lot of that is people love to talk about what they do, and are very happy to talk to Summers and encourage them to try new pieces of the law. So I really just fired off a lot of emails, probably to like 10 different partners and associates in different areas. And that really helped me narrow down the area of law that I wanted to work in. I think, especially with the people that are in the office location that you're in, you can also just swing by and say, hey, if you have time, sometime in the next few weeks, I'd love to talk to you about what you do. And, people are really receptive to that. So I would say, make sure that you're saving enough time through your summer to do that. And if you have kind of a work coordinator, I know our summer program has, mentors and workload coordinators that can help you find assignments in those areas too. So just use your resources. If you have a person that's, assigning through a portal or something, reach out to them and say, hey, I haven't tried, energy law yet, but I'm super interested in that. Or, I'm really interested in M&A and I haven't gotten an assignment in that yet. Like, can you help me find someone to talk to that can give me experience in that area? But using your resources is, that's what people are here for. So, yeah.
Yeah, and then David, switching to you, I know that you had quite a few different summer program experiences when you were going through as a law student. How did you end up on both energy litigation and bankruptcy, and how did you decide that litigation would be your focus going into a law firm?
So that's kind of interesting. I think I largely knew going into law school I wanted to be a litigator. That's what kind of drove me to the practice of law. Um, it was also a time when litigation was what like 80% of people in law school were doing. There were not as many kind of huge corporate sections and huge corporate deals being done at big law firms as much as now. So litigation was a huge driver already. And I ended up in energy litigation as a 1L, I think because I was in Texas, and that's obviously a huge part of it. And that may have just been kind of random assignment. I don't remember if I picked that or if that happened. And I remember I ended up in bankruptcy because I said, well, I'm pretty sure I want to do litigation. So I'd like something else, that contrasts with that so I can confirm I really want to do litigation, thinking it was going to be like corporate or tax or whatever. And it was bankruptcy, which is like basically litigation. So, that didn't kind of work out the way I planned. Because, a huge chunk of bankruptcy is adversarial. It's still in a court. But it was interesting to see a very different side of things and kind of what I'd consider a specialized practice area versus a, general practice area that has some focus on it. And oddly enough, I've ended up doing a ton of bankruptcy work over the years, in adversarial proceedings. But yeah, that's how I ended up in, I think, 1L energy and bankruptcy stuff.
So I'm going to switch topics again. A couple of questions that I've gotten recently from some of our summer associates, if they're thinking about clerking, is uh, how the firms view if you ask to use a writing sample and kind of what you should keep in mind if you want to use something that you've worked on as a clerkship writing sample. So what some of the advice that I've given has been to make sure that you ask, because often what you're working on is for a specific client, and it might have confidential work product that you can't just share with a court or with a different firm if you're applying for a different firm. But I'm curious to hear from you, David, specifically how you recommend that the Summers approach that, and whether you think it makes sense to use a writing sample from a firm for a clerkship application.
Yeah, I think it would be great to do so. It part of it depends on what the assignment is. I mean, hopefully it is real substantive work, like especially if it's a section of a memo that you draft, or a motion that you drafted, or a brief that you drafted, as opposed to a memo. Because a memo is just not the same type of thing that you can actually dig into in the same way. I guess thinking about it right now, memos are probably more akin to clerkship writing in a way, because it's less, especially from the litigation perspective, it's not an advocacy piece. It's a more thoughtful piece on what the law actually says versus using that as a tool for your client's benefit. But and I would say, first off, like when we're evaluating summer associate work, our biggest focus is on writing. Can the summer associate write well? All of the legal stuff, you're in law school, you're still learning about the law, you're still learning how to research law, you're still learning how all of that fits together. We can give a lot of grace on that. But the question of, like, can you put together a thoughtful argument, a well-structured memo, a well-structured section of a brief or something like that? Like, that's what we're really focused on, because it shows your thinking, it shows your organization. And that's, something that can be taught, and we expect people to learn that in clerkships as well. But it's something that, if it doesn't read well, it's a huge red flag for us. So that being said, my expectation would be you'd have like really good written work product to that's coming out of your summer clerkship experience. It's probably a lot more interesting than something you've written in law school that's going to be broader. This is like more focused on a very specific area, and a very specific question in ways that you probably haven't had a chance to dig into in law school. And so to me, that does lend itself a lot better to, thoughtful analysis, something interesting that is much more useful for like a clerkship application or some other type internship application, whatever. So as Meg said, I'd give the exact same advice. You need to run it by the people you are working with on that and say, hey, I would like to use this, even if it's after the fact. If it's 2 months later, email them and be like, hey, I was a summer associate a few months ago. I worked on this. I would like to use it as um, you know, as some type of written work product for an application. What should I do? And you may need to go ahead and redact certain things. There may be some details you need to leave out. You may need to change clients' names and things like that. It all depends on, what it contains. But yeah, just kind of keep that in mind. The attorney should be able to give you some guidance on exactly what that looks like. And the court's not going to really care. And, I'd be upfront and put brackets and, note that this was a, um, written work product during your summer associate period, and certain items have been changed for confidentiality concerns. The court's totally going to understand that. Just make sure it's something that reflects your thinking and everything else, and it should be great. The other thing that I would recommend is keeping track of all of your written work product that you do as a summer associate, as well as the matters you've worked on. Welcome to the world of conflicts. You are creating conflicts right now by working at a firm and providing legal services. When you go to either, if it's that firm, it's not going to be an issue. But if you end up going to a different firm, question number one is going to be, okay, what clients have you worked for? What cases have you worked on? Who have you been adverse to? And you need to know that information so that, you can either deal with those conflicts to the extent they exist or get walled off or whatever other steps are necessary. So, time to start keeping track of that information now.
Yeah. And similarly, Leah, on the written work product side, have you ever had summer associates come and ask you for permission to use something that they prepared for you in a different application? And how would you approach that?
Yes, this actually happened last summer. Kind of a similar situation with the clerkship. And like David said, it was important that the summer communicated that, because we were able to talk to the client and make sure that we got permission from the client to use the writing sample. And we just had the associate kind of redact names, certain details. Something else that I told that summer that I think might be helpful is, I'm sure whatever firm that you're working at has someone who has clerked before, and they might have clerked for that judge. A lot of the time that information is available on your kind of internal website or database. So reach out to former clerks and ask them what kind of writing samples, are useful, what kind of writing, if it's the same judge, what kind of writing that judge might be looking for, and kind of tips like that. Because I think the people you work with are a really valuable resource. So I think that it's super helpful to talk to them and say, when you clerked, how did you, what sample did you use? What should I be thinking about? Those kind of questions.
And then kind of jumping from a point that both of you have raised about, using the summer to think about future career options. I know that David mentioned keeping track of the matters that you worked on in case you have conflicts at a different firm that you summer at or at a different law firm after law school. Leah, starting with you, do you have any other tips on, as we're going the second half of the summer, questions that summer associates might ask their mentors or associates at the firm, things about how to plan for 3L and the next years?
Yeah, I think something that's helpful is not only keeping track of your matters for potential conflicts issues, but also, even if you're not thinking about changing your job, for your 3L year or after, it's nice to kind of have a spreadsheet of all of the matters you worked on, research you've done. Chances are, if you go back to the same firm, that matter might still be, happening, and you might be looped in again. And it's nice to say, reach out when you come back and say, oh, I worked on, XYZ case. Here's the research I did. Like, happy to help with anything else you might need. And that might be a really good way for you to start getting work when you come into the firm. I would also say it's really important to check in with your mentors, kind of about any feedback you've received, and talk to them about kind of, okay, I haven't tried this area yet. Like, what do I need to do before the end of the summer to make sure that I'm getting, everything out of the summer that I'm putting in? So if there's someone you haven't talked to yet, how can I get connected with them? Things like that. I've also had summers ask me, what classes might be important for me to take in the next year to be successful in XYZ area, or those kind of questions. My answer to that is usually take what classes you find interesting. Sometimes it's important, if you want to be a litigator, to take those federal courts classes or things like that. But I remember my 3L year, I was taking like sports law, things that I, don't always use day to day, but that I found interesting. Yeah, but I would also just say, take stock of the feedback you've gotten and talk to your mentors about, how your summer's going. If you think there's an area that you've gotten particular feedback about that you want to talk through, I think that's really important. And talk to them about the people you have been working with. If there's a particular group that you really like and you're really interested in, it's important to communicate that to mentors and the summer committee and people that can help you, figure out if you can slot into that group eventually, or, if you've tried something and you really find that it doesn't mesh with your working style or you're not interested in it, it's also okay to talk to, a trusted mentor about that as well and say, I thought that I was really going to love M&A, but I, worked on due diligence and I am not interested in it and I'd really like to try X. This is your time to figure out what kind of things you are interested in. And people are available to help you make sure that you get experience in those areas. But from a summer committee perspective, it's important for us to know what people are interested in and what they've tried and who they've worked with so that we can think about, if they come back to the firm after they graduate, where might they be slotted in? What might they be involved in? Things like that.
And then we got a question in the Q&A that kind of touches on that feedback point that you had, Leah. It says, what are your thoughts on seeking honest feedback instead of a general or positive response that might be given to avoid discouraging a summer associate? So do you have any thoughts on things a summer associate might do to follow up and get that genuine feedback?
Sure. I think this happens a lot where, supervising attorneys are really excited to work with summers and are genuinely giving good feedback because the summer did a great job. But if you feel like, I want honest feedback, it's okay to ask them to sit down and walk through the assignment with you. I think often, attorneys are busy and they'll write out feedback without thinking too much about the nitty-gritty details, and they'll say, this is a great assignment, you did a great job. And that might be true, but it's also helpful to see what you're missing. So I think in that kind of scenario, it is important to ask for, honest feedback. And you can do that by following up and saying, thanks so much, I saw your feedback. Do you have, 10 minutes to walk through this memo with me? I'd, like to ask some follow-up questions or see where I could improve next time. And if you frame it as that kind of follow up and seeing where you can improve, people are happy to point out, things that you might be able to look into next time or areas that you might have missed. And I think that's really important to your own self-development to get that honest feedback. So I definitely encourage, following up. But if you're getting good feedback, take that to heart. People mean it. They won't give you glowing reviews if they don't. So.
Yeah. And David, I'd be curious to get your thoughts on that, how a summer could go about getting kind of more specific or genuine feedback.
Yeah, I mean it depends on what the assignment is. If it's a memo, that one is just a request to sit down and go through it and talk through it because I'm not going to rewrite the memo or something like that. And so that's as easy as you know, can you set aside 30 minutes or an hour or something like that? And we'll just walk through the thing and talk through it. And I mean, that's usually what's going to happen regardless, because I'm going to have questions about XYZ. Did you find, what did the other cases say about this? Did you look at this piece of things? That kind of stuff. Did you consider this as we're walking through the memo? But especially if it's a substantive piece of work product, so it's, a motion or a brief or a section of one of those, something like that. I am, just as I would do with any associate, almost certain I'm going to redline it fairly substantially. And that doesn't mean it's really bad or anything like that. It's just that we can't help ourselves. And, perfect is always the enemy of the good. And we also want it in our own writing style. And of course, the dirty secret is it takes way less time to redline something, especially when the substantive work is done, and kind of put it in the voice you want and improve it versus just taking it and writing it from scratch. But for something like that, what I would do is, as a partner, I would send the associate or the summer associate the red line And and I would tell them, I would say like your work is don't read too much into this. Like your work, I would tell them is what I expect from a summer associate. Like that's good for a summer associate. Or, I was totally happy with that. And frankly, a lot of the time it's like what you gave me, we could have filed. But then, I wanted to change it in a few different ways. And I'm happy, take a look at it. I'm happy to kind of walk through the thinking and discuss all of those things. And so, that's really the best opportunity to kind of go through things and talk about, well, why'd you change this? Why did you take this piece out or move this around? And things along those levels. So a lot of it is, and this will stay true when you're an associate as well, especially a fairly new associate. It is not kind of meant to be unhelpful feedback to say like this is good, this is kind of, and meeting expectations is very good, like this is to the level we want it to be right now. There's still substantial room for improvement. The fact that there's substantial room for improvement doesn't mean it's not, where it needs to be. So nobody's kind of lying if they say like, no, this was very good and very helpful, even if the ultimate work product looks nothing like it. So I think it's just a matter of asking, and anybody, I always view it as like part of the part of the bargain of having someone do work for me is that I'm obligated to give them feedback and talk through it and make sure they understand what where I'm coming from on things.
And then for the last 10 minutes or so, I know that from our own summers, I know that clerkship hiring I mean, it's a different plan every year, but the plan has opened up. And so people are getting their applications in, they're interviewing. One of the questions I've gotten is, does it make sense in your view to ask an associate or a partner that you've summered at the firm where you've summered to give you a letter of recommendation for a clerkship? And David, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see any downside to that, especially if it's somebody, I mean, so no secret, we're huge fans of clerkships and we require all of our associates to clerk for a federal judge. Um, and so part of it is like, if we want you to come to our firm, we are going to go out of our way to help you. And so that doesn't just include, letters of recommendations, but it's, who knows this judge? What can we do to help someone get this clerkship that they really want, that they're very interested in, or so and so's interviewing? Can we, anyone can give them advice for that. So, firms are very invested in associates clerking, at least on the litigation side, because there's kind of very valuable direct benefit to that. Um, so, and I will also say, like, from the corporate side, I had co-clerks, both in my chambers and in surrounding chambers who ended up going into corporate work. I don't think it transfers exactly the same way. Um, but there's a obvious, I think, benefit to this incredibly unique opportunity to go spend a year or two, in a role that nobody otherwise gets to see, where you are helping a judge make decisions, write things, learning from a judge directly, what all of that looks like. It just gives you a different insight into the law. It gives you a different insight into the profession as well. Um, and so, and I know there was a question in the chat about value of clerking and, going into a transactional group. One, I cannot imagine if you want to clerk that would somehow be a negative. Okay. Or if it is, I would consider that. And that would surprise me, and I might read something into that. But it is a really unique opportunity. I would feel free to ask people in the group though, if the question is, will this add something to my resume that's helpful? Will this be something that would benefit me later in my career? If you're not just interested in kind of clerking for the sake of clerking and spending the time to do that, then I would absolutely ask the people in your practice group. They should be very honest about that because, if it is beneficial, then they want you to do it. If they're saying, well, look, if you're not really interested in doing it and you'd rather come, make money and whatever, like, then I'd take all of that at face value. But yeah, realistically, your firm should be very interested in helping you in any way possible get a clerkship, because it's an investment in you. It's an extra year or two before you show up at the firm, but like it, can really benefit your career, which benefits the firm that you're going to as well.
And Leah, what are your thoughts, if you have any, about clerkships and whether they're helpful for corporate work?
Yeah, I would definitely second what David said. I think there's value in a clerkship for on the corporate side, just to the extent of, you're still doing some writing. Corporate is obviously not the same animal as litigation in terms of, briefing and things like that. But I think there's a lot of value in learning how to write and communicate in a way that, is very clear, is objective. And I think, if that's something you're interested in corporate work, yeah, it's worth talking to the other people that you might be working with in the group and ask, has anyone in our group clerked before? Who did they clerk for? Things like that. There's also certain courts that might be more helpful for corporate work. So if you're thinking about, clerking in Delaware, or certain districts might have really helpful cases for that kind of corporate work and business disputes generally. I think the broadest value, though, that comes with being a corporate associate and clerking is seeing the broader picture. Obviously, if you are doing corporate work, you don't want your contract or your deal to fall through or to be challenged, but sometimes that happens, and it's kind of helpful to see how litigation works so that you can help your client avoid litigation or prepare for it. I think thinking about corporate just in its own insular piece is doing yourself a disservice. So if that's something you're interested in, I'd highly encourage talking to people in the group and asking if it's helpful for your development. Same on the litigation side. Obviously, clerking is very, very helpful and highly encouraged. So I think, yeah, there's a huge benefit to talking through that and keeping the people that you might be working with in the future in the loop into what kind of development opportunities you're interested in for your career.
Yeah, and I'd especially like to echo what both David and Leah said about, if you're thinking about it, reaching out to the people who are in the transactional group that you've been summaring in. Chances are some of them have made that exact same decision themselves, and they'll be able to tell you why they did or didn't clerk. For some people, it really is, it's a huge difference in pay for a lot of people. And even if you're there's certain districts where they up the pay for judicial clerks because they're eager to get people out there. There's some that have higher pay because of cost of living, but it still might not be enough for you to work on paying off your loans if you don't have a special payment program or something like that. But definitely, like David said, if it will be helpful, then they'll be helping you to try and get the clerkship or give you advice on what to do. And if it's not, then you can still take it with a grain of salt, but you can find out what their thought process was. So as our last question, I'd just like to ask, I'll start with David. What are your thoughts on summer associates closing out their summer and then reaching out to people that they worked with over the next year? Do you think that's a good idea, bad idea? Any thoughts about it?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. I mean, part of it's going to be a question of like, when does your firm give permanent offers? When do they give permanent offers? Things like that. So let's assume like the fairly standard thing from my understanding is, you go finish your summer when all the summers are gone. Whoever the decision makers at that firm get together and decide to extend permanent offers. Let's assume you get a permanent offer from your firm. I think it is always great and welcome. Even if you haven't turned around and accepted that offer, let's say you're going to go clerk and you want to just keep your options open, or your judge doesn't allow you to have an offer accepted or anything along those lines. It is, always nice not just to keep in contact, with people, and remind them that you exist. But also, like, if you're going to be in town or something like that, let's say you're in law school in a different city from where you're going to end up, and you're going home or traveling through or whatever, feel free to reach out to people, and they're happy to take you out for a nice dinner, let you know what's going on, all of that kind of stuff. And it's still a recruiting thing, and you just have to remember that all the recruiting is kind of a dance where there's two partners to it. Okay, you are feeling out the firm and whether it's a good fit for you just as much as they are trying to decide whether to bring you on board. And then once they've made that decision, then they're in real recruitment mode, which is what can we do to bring you here and convince you that this is the place for you. So absolutely keep in contact. I don't see any downside to that. And I will have the other thought, which is, let's say you worked with an associate in a practice group or something like that, and you notice 6 months down the road that they're moving to a different firm. There's absolutely nothing wrong with reaching out and saying, hey, I really enjoyed getting to know you at X firm. I've noticed you've moved in-house or wherever. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Just why, what that career path is. And so always kind of keep that in mind as well as you're looking at firms. You're going to get to know some of these people, and they will all kind of spread very quickly at different times. Keep an eye towards, and you can also ask while you're a summer associate, look, as people, how much do people tend to leave? Why are they leaving and where are they going? Are they going in-house for certain opportunities that sound amazing? Are they lateraling to other firms? Is it what do people end up doing and why? And that should be something that people are fairly open about, though it's always going to be a unique situation. You can get a feel for what that looks like, since you're not necessarily signing up for an entire career at a single place.
Leah, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I completely agree, especially on that last point. It's telling to see where the people in the group that you're interested in go. And, something that I love about the group I'm in is that there's a great retention rate, and the opportunities people take are really great opportunities at, great in-house firms. But I think there's a big draw towards groups that, people really like working with. I'd also add, if you have a trusted mentor from your summer program, or an associate that you worked with that you really like, I'd encourage you to stay in contact with them. They can help you with career thoughts, law school thoughts. I know I am in contact with my mentee from last summer, and, we got coffee a few times throughout the year and, talked about how law school was going and, her clerkship opportunities and kind of how she wanted to approach certain things with the firm and her clerkship. And I think that is a really valuable resource, and it's fun. It's fun for the attorneys that you worked with to stay in contact, and I would very highly encourage you to do that. I think it's important to keep a broad network no matter what you're thinking about for after graduation, and it's nice to just have those people in your life and stay in contact, and that's helpful information for you, but also can be really beneficial, just from a career and mentorship perspective.
Well, thanks both Leah and David for your time this morning. Thanks to our attendees.